Hello friends, recently I asked MCQ on JVP and I thought the majority would answer it correctly, but to my surprise only 25% of the answers were right. So what went wrong? Let's see the MCQ, and before we start with that, let me tell you cardiac cycle is a topic which is very important. If you know it extremely well, only then you can answer such questions. Let's see. The question was this: in the JVP, between X descent and V upstroke, which of the following occurs? And the options are opening of tricuspid valve, or opening of pulmonary valve, or closure of pulmonary valve, or ejection of stroke volume into the pulmonary artery. You want to take this? Answer this? All right. The answer is closure of the pulmonary valve. And let's see why that's the answer. Before we start looking at the MCQ itself, let me just recall uh, cardiac cycle events. There are four major events: atrial systole, atrial diastole, ventricular systole, ventricular diastole. When we talk of JVP, we are talking about the pressure changes in the right atrium. Atrial pressure changes, specifically right atrial pressure changes. So if you see the atrial events, there is atrial systole for 0.1 second, and remaining 0.7 seconds there is atrial diastole, which means if we have to record the atrial pressure changes from the right atrium or from the JVP, it would be rise of pressure atrial systole and then fall of pressure atrial diastole, right? Now during the atrial diastole, that 0.7 seconds when the atrial pressure is falling, two events in the ventricle, right ventricle, two events, they cause rise of pressure again. Means atrial pressure is falling. All this time there is atrial diastole. But during this period, something happens in the right ventricle, two events which cause pressure to rise again twice. So you can see these two peaks which have occurred during a falling pressure of the right atrium, and therefore the record which is obtained is something like this. A, C, V are the three upstrokes. A is of course atrial systole, and the other two peaks are because of the ventricular events that the atrial pressure is rising. And two downstrokes, X descent and Y descent. Let's see why the events are occurring, and then finally we will talk about what is happening between X and Y. All right. Now A, of course, is atrial systole, rise of pressure in the atrium. Then the pressure begins to fall. Atrial diastole starts, pressure begins to fall. But now concentrate on the ventricular events, right ventricular events. There is ventricular systole which starts. Now at the start of ventricular systole, there is isovolumic contraction, if you remember. And what is isovolumic contraction? That is, the tricuspid valve has got closed. Let's show it here. The tricuspid valve has got closed, but pulmonary valve has not yet opened in front of the right ventricle. Pulmonary valve, it has not yet opened. Right ventricle is just contracting against these two closed valves. Let's repeat it again. All right, here. Isovolumic contraction of the right ventricle. Ventricle has gone into systole. So isovolumic contraction means ventricular pressure is rising. Tricuspid valve has got closed, but pulmonary valve has not yet opened. So ejection could not be started. Now because of this kind of a isovolumic contraction, pressure is building up in the right ventricle and there is no let off to that pressure. The pressure is mounting against these two closed valves. So what happens is, this closed tricuspid valve simply bulges backward into the right atrium. It balloons backward into the right atrium like this because of the rising pressure in the right ventricle, and it has got no let off. So the ballooning backward of the tricuspid valve into the right atrium during isovolumic contraction of the right ventricle. This bulging backward causes a rise of pressure in the right atrium. Remember, we are talking about the atrial pressure changes. Now, this pressure change has occurred because of the ventricular event, that is isovolumic contraction, ballooning backward of the tricuspid valve, all right? And that is shown as upstroke C. But soon the isovolumic contraction period will be over. It means, what happens is pulmonary valve opens now, and the ejection starts, right ventricular ejection starts. So there is a let off to that pressure now. It can, this pressure has got a let off, and therefore this ballooned backward tricuspid valve will come back to its normal position and right atrial pressure will continue to fall. It was falling already. Atrium is in diastole. The pressure was falling. It just increased a little bit because of that bulging backward of the tricuspid valve during isovolumic contraction of the right ventricle. But then it continues to fall. Why it continues to fall? Because now right ventricular ejection is happening and atrial pressure was anyways falling, so it will continue to fall. All right. So X descent indicates right ventricular ejection. All right. This phase is right ventricular ejection and atrial pressure was falling. It continues to fall. Now the point comes where we answer the MCQ. At the end of ventricular systole, right ventricular systole is over, ejection is over, right ventricular ejection is over. Now the ventricular diastole starts, and at the start of ventricular diastole, there is isovolumic relaxation. What happens during isovolumic relaxation? The pulmonary valve closes, ejection has ended, so pulmonary valve will close, but now tricuspid valve is also closed. It has not yet opened. So filling cannot start. Blood cannot go from right atrium to right ventricle. Closure of the pulmonary valve at the end of systole and systolic ejection over. So pulmonary valve closes and tricuspid valve is closed. It has not yet opened and ventricle is relaxing like a closed chamber. That's isovolumic relaxation. So during this phase of isovolumic relaxation, and why it is isovolumetric or isovolumic, it's because tricuspid valve could not be opened yet. Because of that, blood coming from the periphery accumulates in the right atrium because tricuspid valve has not yet opened. So blood accumulates in the right atrium during isovolumic relaxation, and that accumulation of blood in the right atrium results in rise of pressure in the right atrium, which is V wave. The upstroke, that is V wave, indicates that the blood is accumulated in the right atrium and therefore pressure is rising in the right atrium because tricuspid valve could not open yet. But pulmonary valve has got closed at the end of the ventricular ejection. As the ventricular ejection ended, X descent and the rise of pressure after that is because pulmonary valve closed and tricuspid valve already it is in a closed state, and therefore the blood accumulates in the right atrium, giving rise to this V wave, that is rise of pressure in the right atrium. So this is a phase of isovolumic relaxation and it is causing accumulation of blood in the right atrium. But the question was, what has happened after X wave and before the V wave? Between this time period, the pulmonary valve closed, and because pulmonary valve closed and tricuspid valve is also in a closed state, therefore blood accumulated in the right atrium and causing this rise of pressure. So isovolumic relaxation. And why it happened? It's because of the closure of the pulmonary valve at the end of the X descent, at the end of the ventricular ejection. Pulmonary valve closes and then this period occurs. So the answer was closure of the pulmonary valve, which happens between X and V wave. It was little tricky. I know many people opted for ejection happens or something. Ejection ended by the X descent, where the X descent ends. So therefore that was the MCQ. It was not that tough. Only thing is you have to know the cardiac cycle and its events extremely well, with their logic, with their reasoning, with their mechanisms. Only then you will be able to answer the questions every time correctly. Have you yet subscribed to the channel? No? Go ahead and subscribe now.